Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man the right way, with God at the center. Before we get into today's topic, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, I would encourage you to. Also check out the other podcasts we do, Gunfighter Life if you're into guns and gunfighting. And if you care about the really important stuff, check out Simple Man Sermons, the flagship podcast, the preachings of a simple man, called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. If you already listen and subscribe, I'd encourage you to share these podcasts with others. These podcasts are about helping each other become better men. And that's a common trait among true alpha males. They help other men become stronger and better men. With that, let's get into the bio and then the episode. If you want to skip the bio, skip around 3 minutes and 30-something seconds in. I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God. Alpha males. Let's get into the body of this episode. Let's talk about one of your duties, I believe, as a man, providing. Putting meat on the table. In this case, literally. Putting meat on the table like a man, like an alpha male, like your ancestors before you did. Now, I've touched on this before. I don't remember if it was in this podcast or Gunfighter Life. If you're not familiar, with that podcast. May have talked about it there. But looking at hunting a different way. And I love hunting. I've hunted ever since I was a young boy. And maybe I should get into that now. I hunted as a young boy. And when you were a very young man, I'm talking 7 years old, 10, 11, 12, whatever, you don't really understand or concern yourself with fish and game law. You do what you're told to do by your uncle, by whomever. And looking back on it, I'm not so sure the things that we did were strictly legal, but they were effective for taking game. I am not telling you to be a poacher. I am not telling you to break the law. What I am telling you is that time and looking at wild game, the way that I looked at it, helped me see it more clearly for what it is, which is a resource. And we'll get into that more later, but not looking at it the way everybody else did it. But I grew up poor, rural in the South. I'm not complaining. I didn't know I was poor at the time, but having to walk several miles, I believe, to go to a payphone, because we didn't have a phone, we were poor, are all huddling up in one room in the wintertime around one kerosene heater, because that's what we had to stay warm with my family. Looking back at that now, eating, rice and spaghetti sauce sometimes, we were poor. And that's okay. God provides. I'm just fine. But we saw wild game, meat in the forest, as what it was, a true resource, a blessing. And I didn't grow up Christian. I didn't probably realize it was a blessing from God at the time, but I see it that way now, as a natural resource. And when I went out in the woods to take game, I went out in the woods to take game, to put meat on the table. And I'm going to talk about hunting culture versus actually hunting to put meat on the table. And I'm not putting down hunting culture or hunting for sport. But just like a lot of people that listen to country music maybe have never been off-roading or gotten stuck off-roading, or, they probably don't actually wear cowboy boots or have never worn cowboy boots as part of their job or things like that. And that's fine. That's part of who they've identified themselves as. That's part of their virtual tribe, their culture that they like to fit in, and that's fine. I'm not putting that down. That's fine. But realize that is pretty far removed. That country music listening to big jacked up trucks with giant tires and the new hot camo pattern, whatever it is, that costs as much as a rifle, that you gotta have it this year or you're not the cool kid. You gotta have the new modern camo. I'll tell you, even as a professional guide, a lot of times my clothing was not all camo, and I didn't worry about it. And again, I'm not throwing shade. I'm not putting down that culture. If you want to be part of that, if hunting is what you do for sport, for fun, that's great. That's a great hobby. That's a great thing to do. It's a beautiful recreation. It gets you outside. It gets you out in nature, and I applaud that. That's a fantastic thing. Psalms 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows us his handiwork. But realize that's pretty far removed from putting meat on the table as a resource. So you got to think about, if you have a several $1,000 quad, or even worse, a side-by-side that costs as much as a used car sometimes, and you're driving that around in your brand new camo with the new hot caliber that came out this year that you just had to have, the something point something whatever whiz bang round that just came out that's marginally better than a round that's been around for 100 years, and you have to go out and get all that stuff and buy all your scent blocker, brand new camo, and all this stuff to go shoot a deer. Perhaps driving quite a long way to shoot a deer. And if you've ever shot and harvested deer, by the time you get it all said and done and figure out how much meat you get off a deer, let's say it's a 150-pound deer. let's say you get 75 pounds of usable meat off of that. And we'll talk about some ways maybe to maximize that. But let's say average 75 pounds of good usable meat. By the time you factor that cost per pound, you could have bought filet mignon. You probably could have bought grass-fed organic filet mignon for what it cost. So I don't really see it as a getting that resource in a responsible way as far as cost-benefit analysis goes. And there's more to it than that. I think you should hunt even if the cost-benefit analysis doesn't make sense. But that's a sport. That's a hunting for sport. And again, that's fine. But perhaps that turns a lot of people off, a lot of men off to hunting. And just because that's what you see on Instagram, just because that's what you see on Facebook, that's what a lot of people do, that doesn't mean that's the way that you have to hunt. I would say, first of all, do it in accordance with God laws. Do it ethically. Do it in a way that makes sense financially. Don't go broke doing it. Doing it in a way to obey the local laws. But forget about the culture of it. That has no bearing on it. Forget about that. Let's try and think critically and think about hunting a different way. Thinking critically, whether it applies to hunting or anything else, is an alpha male skill. If you've listened recently, you'll know that I've been living off grid. I'm staring down looking at a river. I just crossed said river. And I did much better this time than I did the first time. Why? Critical thinking. I'm blessed by God to have a brain and hopefully know how to use it. So the first time I thought I was wearing normal clothing, normal loadout. And I thought, I'm just going to roll my pants up to my knees and wade across this creek. Take my shoes off and wade across this creek. Can't be that bad. Well, long story short, I ended up getting very wet, my gun getting wet, all my EDC gear getting wet, everything falling down, all this other stuff. It was a lot harder to ford that river than I had initially thought. Well, this time, instead of just going straight across, I planned it out strategically. I put on a pair of decent shoes that could get wet, where I could get better grip and probably wouldn't fall, and I looked ahead. I planned ahead at the best way. I thought critically at the best way to get across this river. And today I did it, and in a pair of silkies and a decent knife, and got across that river there and back without any major mishaps. A lot quicker, a lot more efficiently, and without ruining a bunch of stuff. Why? Because I thought about it critically. I stepped back and I looked at the situation and I said, what was the best way to do this? I thought critically about it. Well, men, we can do the same thing with hunting. So let us now look at wild game for what it is. A gift from God, a sustainable resource that can be managed and harvested and taken to put meat on the table. Strip away all the culture around hunting, strip out all the crazy brand new this year camo and the quads and the side-by-sides and the scent lock carbon infused clothing and all that stuff. Look at, what do I want to eat? What do I like to eat? What is legal for me to harvest, to take in resources? And think about it critically. How can I best do that? I'll give you an example. When I was blessed to live in Idaho, one of my favorite states, lots of people would drive around on their fancy quads on opening day and make a ton of noise and drive all up and down these mountains and get out and walk a few feet and look around and not see any deer and get back on their quads and drive around and have these giant expeditions to go shoot elk and deer. Whereas myself, I would grab my rifle and a pack, and I would get up a little bit earlier. I wouldn't be hunting yet. I wouldn't have my gun ready or anything, but because that would be illegal. But let's say I just got up early and headed out into the bush long before anybody else. And I would go deep into these crevices and ravines where I figured these big elk and deer would go when all these people rode around on the roads with their quads looking for deer. And sure enough, shortly after opening day, when everybody's driving around making a ton of noise, if you've ever been in the wilderness, in the forest, you'll know how long and how far away you can hear a quad or a truck and how ridiculously loud it is. I mean, these deer know you're coming for they can hear you long before you're probably ever going to see them. Because these people are all about spending money, I think. And that's fine if that's what they want to do and spend their time outside, and not really about fieldcraft. Anyway, I'd get into these crevices, into these deep ravines where they're not driving their quads, thick wood timber with fallen timber, and shortly after they'd start driving their quads around, there would be a plethora of big mule deer and elk in these hollers and these crevices and this fallen timber. Why? Because that's where they weren't getting harassed. But guess what? I was already there. And I don't remember a single time that I didn't use that strategy and tag out, meaning fill my tags on opening day, when everybody else was, who knows what their success rate was, but let's just say there were many a hunter going home without meat and spending far more than I did driving out there. At the time, I think I had a Ford Escape, and sleeping in the back of it a little bit the night before and getting up early with maybe a pocket full of trail mix and getting in these ravines and hollers on foot with just a rifle and a pack, and obviously the other gear, knife, and all those other things, long before they did. And they would drive all the deer to me. That's looking at a situation, thinking about it with the brain God gave me, and thinking critically. Apply that to whatever situation you're in. Now, I'd been hunting my whole life. By the time I'd moved to Idaho, I understood a little bit more about deer and habitat and things like that than a lot of people probably do. But do some research. You know, you live in the age, if you don't live like me off grid where you can just Google stuff, you can find out a lot just by reading and researching and going to the library and things like that. One thing that may actually help you is stepping back, going to the library and checking out books from decades ago and how people hunted then. That is probably far removed from the culture of hunting today. You know, I remember going out as a kid and my dad just hunting in a red plaid shirt, and I don't think I'd ever heard him doing that. One thing, and this may or may not be legal where you are, a lot of places it's illegal, but some places it's not illegal, it's just not part of the culture anymore. But one thing we would do when I was younger were deer drives, and we lived in the southeastern United States, a place that was lush with cypress swamps and the freshwater and saltwater marshes with these little teeny, not technically islands, but like where there was high ground, where there was actually trees and stuff instead of marsh grass that wasn't flooded with the tides and with storms. And we would do deer drives. We would walk, we would have standers maybe on the far side and drivers, and we would push deer. And this is a very primitive way of hunting. This is how a lot of Indian tribes hunted deer. This is how Mongols hunted deer. Not exactly this way, but they would hunt in a tribe. You know, we are tribal people. We're meant to be in a tribe, and it seems silly to not hunt in a tribe if you can. If you can get a group of men together and hunt like this. You know, it may not be the way the people around you hunt, where they sit on their stand and dump a pile of corn and shoot a deer at 100 yards standing over corn. But it may be more effective and more fun for you and more productive at harvesting a natural resource. But you find a plot of land where you can drive the deer out of there and push either the drivers when the animals jump up, shoot them, or the standers shoot them when they run past them. This is still fairly popular in Europe, and it's popular in a lot of places, but in a lot of places in the U.S., even where it's legal, people don't do it because it's not the culture. But if it works, if your goal is to put meat on the table, then look at driving deer. Look at other ways to hunt deer. In fact, I would say you'll probably have better success than what the popular hunting culture is, because if that's what, this just applies to more to life than just hunting, but as an alpha male, If everybody else is doing something one way, it's hard to stand out doing it the same way. Look at a better way to do it. Look at a better way. If everybody else is trying to hunt deer out of a stand with a 3 to 9 power scope and a 30-06, maybe you get in the deep swamps and hunt them with a shotgun and buckshot, because nobody else is doing that and they're not used to it. And that might be where the deer are, because they know they're going to get shot at come hunting season walking out into a cornfield near a deer stand. One of the things I love is hunting out of a canoe. And some places that's illegal. Some places it's illegal to hunt out of any vessel. But in a lot of places it's not. And you can get into little creeks and things like that where it's very, very difficult to walk around. But you can pull a canoe up in there and you can hunt out of a canoe, and you can hunt deer and all other manner of game. And a lot of places where other people won't go, even people with boats, because they have big motor boats, and you can get into a lot of places with a canoe that you can't get into with a motor boat safely. You can ford, creeks and things that have logs that have fallen over and get way back into the swamp and things like that with a canoe. Not expensive, but a very effective hunting tool. I mean, people have been hunting out of canoes for a long, long time. And just because nobody in your area does it, that might mean it's a better way to hunt. You may have some real advantages there. Again, what is the resource you're trying to harvest? Just because everybody hunts ducks around you in a duck blind, or they have these big specialty boats with all this grass, glued onto them and whatever, that doesn't mean you have to do that to kill ducks. I hunted ducks out of a blind when I was younger. I also hunted them out of a canoe when I was younger. But when I went out west, I noticed a lot of people would just do what they call jumping ditches, and they would know where these little creeks were, and they would come up, at different angles to them where they thought ducks would be, and when the ducks jumped up, they shot them. That's a very effective way to hunt ducks. Looking back, I could have done that a ton and had a lot of fun doing that back east. As far as I know, it's not against the law. It never had occurred to me. But that's a great way to hunt. So don't think that if you want to go duck hunting that you have to do it the way everybody else does it. Don't think you need to get by like a lease to have a duck blind to shoot ducks. You don't. You probably need a pair of rubber boots, and a canoe would be helpful for a lot of things, for fishing, for hunting deer, for hunting ducks. But you go on OfferUp or something and buy a canoe, a used canoe, even one that's beat up and maybe needs some repair work for short money, for a short stack of money. And that's a cost-effective, efficient hunting tool. And ducks and geese are a prime meat. If you are into eating meat and you like fat and meat, they have some of the best fat and meat on them, waterfowl does. They were prized, in the settlement days of the American pioneer days, the American West. They were a prized meat, and for a reason. They have a lot of calories. They have a lot of good, healthy fat, which is, if you'll start getting most of your meat from game meat, you'll notice that fat is quite the commodity. A lot of like deer and elk and things like that don't have a lot of fat. So that's a prize thing. A good fat goose is amazing quality of meat and fat. So think about ways to do that. If everybody wants to hunt Canadian geese because they're the cool kid thing to shoot, and they have a limit of a couple a day usually, go hunting snow geese. You can just decimate snow geese. Snow geese sometimes have no limit, and you can shoot a bunch of snow geese if you get into them. And that's a great resource. You might be able to feed yourself better on snow geese in a lot of areas than deer. If you get one deer, but you can get unlimited snow geese, it doesn't take long to add those up. That's what I'm saying about look at your area, see what your goal is, see what's legal, and take advantage of it in a sustainable, morally responsible way. But as I understand it, in a lot of places where they migrate from, snow geese are overpopulated. So, help out the environment and slay you some snow geese and put them on the table. A lot of people will say that they don't taste good. I will tell you that if you cook them right, they can taste quite good. And a lot of that is culture. When I was a professional big game hunter, we hunted all manner of exotics, and people would say, probably because they were rare, the axis deer is so good and And I heard that in Idaho where whitetail deer were more rare. Oh, whitetail is so much better than mule deer. I almost guarantee if I cooked, and that was part of my job, I would cook wild game meat for clients. If I didn't tell them what it was and told them it was something else, and I wouldn't do that because it's dishonest, they would never know. And they'd be like, oh, it's delicious. It could have been whitetail. It could have been elk. It could have been axis deer or fallow deer. It could have been bison. If I make a teriyaki reduction sauce and put that over some fried rice, they're all delicious. They're all wonderful. They're all mostly cervids and they taste very similar. So that's a good example. Let's say you live in Idaho and everybody's about shooting whitetail because they're rarer. Go out and shoot mule deer. Mule deer are freaking delicious. They're a delicious animal to eat. Some people will tell you that sea ducks don't taste very good, and so a lot of people won't hunt them. But if there's a lot of sea duck in your area, sea duck is good eating. They're a good, clean animal to eat. So that's what I'm saying. Look at it critically. Think how you can take advantage of it. You don't need all this crazy stuff. Think about what you're trying to do and how to do it best. I don't want hunting to become a rich man's sport. I don't want hunting to be only for the affluent or only for the people that, have side-by-sides and can spend $900 on new camo every year. Because honestly, you don't need that stuff. And a lot of that stuff can become more of a distraction and hinder you more than help you. And again, I'm not putting that down. If you want to do that for fun, for sport, that's great. But if you want to put meat on the table as a man and be able to have the skill to put meat on the table, those aren't the most cost-effective way, and a lot of times not even the most effective way to take game. If you look at the trend right now in big game hunting, it's all about long-range, super high BC bullets and a bunch of expensive glass and supercomputer laser rangefinders and things like that. And if that's how you want to put meat on the table, that's fine. But I don't see that as very cost-effective. You can literally go get an old, Savage model 110, 30-06 with a decent scope for a couple of $100 and go out with good fieldcraft in the woods and put meat on the table. Even cheaper, you could go get at a gun show used or even at a big box store new, a decent pump action shotgun with slugs and buckshot and some birdshot and go out and harvest food sustainably without breaking the bank. Hunting should be a way for an average man to put meat on the table, and you can still do that if you think critically about it. So if thus far the hunting culture has kind of turned you off, or the cost-benefit analysis has kind of turned you off, I'd say step back and look at it critically and think, can I use hunting, trapping, whatever, to put meat on the table efficiently and effectively? And the answer to that may be no. If you live in Manhattan, the answer to that's probably no. But I'll tell you that I lived in Las Vegas, and that's maybe one of the worst places for hunting in the country. And I still did it successfully and sustainably in the city. I trapped successfully in the city, especially when things started getting bad during the pandemic. I thought, you're better than this. Don't just go to the grocery store to get food. Get your own food. And I did successfully with just simple snares. Again, I had been a professional trapper before in my past. I knew how to make snares. A lot of that is skill. But I would easily set out a few snares and come home and have meat. And it was great. And you can do that as well. You can literally get some snare wire for a few dollars and make a bunch of snares. That's what I'm talking about as far as thinking critically. Again, make sure it's legal, get your proper stamps or whatever, and be ethical. If you're going to set snares or set conibear traps, you need to go out and check them every day. You need to check. You don't want an animal stuck in there and starving to death. That is not being an alpha male. That's just not cool. You're called to have dominion over the animals, but you're supposed to have good ethics and morals. You wouldn't want to starve to death in a trap. So don't leave an animal to starve to death in a trap. I'm all about slaying beasts and putting meat on the table, and I don't apologize for that. But I also don't want any animal to suffer more than it has to for me to get that job done. And you shouldn't either. Now, you'll know, if you've listened to many past episodes, I often do tactical tips. I think the whole third part of this podcast, I'm going to do several tips and tricks on ways for you to do this and save money. We talked about a few already. Get on OfferUp, look for an old rowboat or an old cheap canoe, maybe one that needs patching. I would really recommend staying away from aluminum unless it's just a screaming deal. I have never been in an old aluminum vessel that didn't leak. Not that that should turn you off. I mean, you can hunt out of leaky boats. You can fish out of leaky boats. Not a big deal as long as you stay on top of it. Craigslist or OfferUp and finding a good used canoe, especially a polymer or fiberglass one that's easily patched and repaired for short money, is a good option. So look at that. Obviously you live in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona, that's probably not going to help you. But again, look at it critically. An old rowboat, an old something like that. When there were professional waterfowl hunters that harvested commercially, they often use little tiny rowboats or something very similar to a canoe. You don't need a fancy vessel to hunt out of. And a lot of times you're better off with a smaller, simpler, quieter vessel. So that's one way. Another way, don't think that you need all this expensive camo. Literally, if you need cheap hunting clothes, go to Goodwill. Because if you do the things that I'm telling you and you find some good matte colored clothing at Goodwill, you'll probably be better off than buying a bunch of expensive stuff and then wearing it when you go to pump gas at the gas station and sit down at a restaurant or whatever you do. Go to Goodwill or Walmart or wherever. The construction, the material that it's made out of is more important than the camo pattern, in my opinion. Depending on the climate that you hunt in, some good 100% polyester warming layers will go a long way. I would stay away from blue jeans. You can hunt in blue jeans. Many people have done it. But a lot of animals do see the color blue fairly well. Even animals you think of as seeing in black and white, like deer, I've heard that they see blue. So stay away from blue jeans, but like your carpenter pants, your Dickies, anything like that, 100% cotton pants, you can get them and very easily water treat them. So you got your good 100% polyester or 100% wool warming layer. You have your good outer garment. You may want a decent jacket. And again, this doesn't have to be camo. Olive drab, tan, browns, grays, any of these will work. They don't have to match. They don't have to do any of that. But get your good thing that you're going to hunt with. You probably want some gloves. You'll probably want a hat. And get these and take them home and wash them in a creek, wash them in a ditch. You're not drinking this water. It doesn't have to be super clean. In fact, if it smells a little, that might be a good thing. Wash them by hand in there with no soap, with no anything else. They really smell to start out with. God gave you a nose. Smell them. If they smell like fabric softener or some garbage like that, then maybe wash them in some water with baking soda. But you don't want to wash them in city water. You don't want to wash them in anything like that, because I can smell city water. Like if I go and smell water, I can tell if it's city water or spring water or purified water. And if I can smell that with my nose, certainly a deer or a bear or something can smell that. So wash it in creek water, wash it in ditch water, catch water, assuming there's nothing crazy in your gutters. Wash it with the water that runs down from the rain out of your gutters. Wash it in that water. And then hang it to dry outside. Don't throw it in a dryer. It's going to smell like other things, dryer sheets or whatever, city people use to make stuff smell better or what they think smells better. Hang them outside. You remember clotheslines? Yeah, that's a thing. You can literally hang a piece of 550 cord between two trees and hang your clothes up. Let them dry outside. And then when they're dry, take a simple garbage bag, a simple plastic bag, something that is an odor barrier, and throw your dry clothes in there, and then go look in whatever environment you're going to hunt in. Pine is a real easy one. It's in almost every environment. Go grab some pine or go grab some sage or something like that and throw that in the bag and then tie it up. You don't need all this fancy scent block stuff. You don't need all this crazy stuff. If you'll do that, that'll be more effective than going out and spending hundreds of dollars on the Gucci camo And then, like I said, wearing it to pump gas. Keep this stuff in the bag until you go out to hunt and then put it on in that environment. Minimize the amount of contamination you're going to get on it. The fanciest Gucci brand new camo pattern that you get this year that you went and wore to go hunting and pumped gas and spilled gas on is worse than the stuff you bought at Goodwill and had good scent discipline on. Reading the wind is super important. You could almost smell like a gas pump if you know how to read the wind work the wind properly. You could almost certainly do better. So that is another big thing, but that's something you have to learn on your own in fieldcraft and things like that. A little tip I'll give you, whatever is dry in your environment, and as I'm looking out into the Oregon rainforest right now, that might be harder than others, but a lot of times you can find something dry that blows around easily in your environment. But something like that you can pick up, in the south, the southwest, the dry desert, arid regions, it's super easy to pick up, dust and see which way the wind's blowing. Or the old trick of perhaps licking your finger and holding it up and figuring out which way the wind's blowing. If it's a very slight breeze, it can still carry your scent quite a way. And knowing where that is and how to hunt an area, like we said, thinking critically, looking at a hilltop and saying, I'm going to hunt this mountain, I'm going to hunt this hill, and looking at it afar off, and then reading the wind and saying, okay, this is the landscape, this is the wind, how do I best approach these animals to kill them? That's thinking critically. The next one is important. Scouting. Don't just show up on opening day to hunt an area that you've never walked around before. A lot of your success comes in the months and weeks before hunting season. Know that area. Know it well. Again, especially if you're hunting public land where there might be quite a bit of pressure, know and understand deer's habitat and habits and where they're likely to go, and go places where most people aren't going to go. Again, a lot of people are just going to drive around and walk 50 yards and look around on a road or something and be like, oh, I don't see any deer. You get in the thick of it. You get into terrain where a lot of people won't go. And that's one of my biggest tips for success. One of the biggest tactical tips. Go where others don't generally go. Because deer know that. Don't think the deer don't know that. They can smell how many people have gone through an area likely in a week or anything like that. If you go to places where almost nobody will venture to go, you'll do well. But you should know those areas first. Don't expect to find those on opening day. Go where others don't go or won't go. But scout that area out. When nobody's hunting. I kind of disagree with hunting season being a few weeks and a certain time of year. You look historically at people that, hunter-gatherers, they have to hunt all year. It kind of sucks that we only get to hunt a little bit in certain times of the year. But if that is the case, again, like I say, don't go to prison for the sake of shooting a deer or something. Get your scouting. You can go scouting without going hunting. And a lot of time that's a big part of success. Knowing that creek, knowing that mountain and valley and river system, knowing those dark timber areas, knowing where the water sources are, knowing all that stuff ahead of time is a giant part of success. Knowing what foods deer are eating in your area in certain times of the year. Knowing how to read sign. Tracking is not some crazy thing that African bush people do. It's something that likely your ancestors, whether you're European, you're a white European like me, or a black African, or descended from Mongols in Asia, that's something all our ancestors did. They learned how to track and kill animals. It's not some crazy thing. You can do it. It's a skill that's worth having. It comes in handy in urban environments. I remember when I was a commander of a tactical team, and nobody on my team that I knew of have ever actually had real experience hunting, which is sad. But I would get in a parking garage and track people down because I knew how to track. If I can follow a blood trail in a wet forest, I can follow a blood trail of a suspect that's been shot in a parking lot or in a parking garage. It's a good skill to have, tracking, for lots of reasons. Get out there and learn how to track, even when it's not hunting season. Know how to tell what's the difference between a big male deer and a female deer just by their tracks. Know where they went to the bathroom, where they marked, things like that. Understand that deer. It's, again, think critically. Now, don't care about big bucks. If your goal is to put meat on the table, but in a lot of places, you're limited to taking like a fork antlered buck or something like that. And I honestly don't care if I'm hunting for meat. I'll shoot a little young deer. The meat is delicious. But being able to tell the difference will help you out. And knowing what time of the year the deer breed, do what's called rut, understanding their habits, their mating habits, things like that are important. And tracking. And you can a lot of times discern how deer are behaving just by their tracks, where they cross certain rivers. Deers are creatures of habit too, just like people are. They have their morning breakfast route. They have their morning going home route. Sometimes they may differ, especially during breeding season, but a lot of times they walk the same trails over and over and over again. And knowing how fresh tracks are, knowing how fresh dung is, looking in their droppings and seeing what they've been eating, what they haven't been eating. All that stuff is important and stuff that you can learn and understand. And a lot of this is stuff you're not going to learn from me telling you an audio podcast. Go get your boots dirty. Go get a pair of cowboy boots or muck boots. And instead of like country music culture, actually get out and get them dirty and muddy and understand the animal that you're trying to kill and put on the table. And again, step back and think critically and look at it like the resource that it is, a God-given, beautiful resource of clean, organic, sustainably harvested, all the buzzwords, meat that you can put on the table for you and your family and provide like a man, like an alpha male. So if thus far you have never hunted or never gotten into hunting, I don't care if you grew up in Manhattan. I don't care if you grew up in Harlem in the ghetto. I don't care if you don't like guns. This probably isn't a podcast for you, but even if you don't, there's probably a way for you to put meat on the table without any of that. With just a piece of simple picture frame wire, you can put meat on the table. With just fishing string, you can put meat on the table. I'm not just talking fish. That's probably a different episode. But you can apply all the critical thinking stuff to fishing as well. You don't need a $40,000 bass boat and a bunch of Gucci gear and, Salt Life shirts to go catch fish. You really don't. You need a fish. You don't even need a fish hook. You can make your own, but buying a fish hook is a good return on investment. A fish hook is a fishing string, and you can probably go out in your natural environment and find whatever it is they're eating and catch it and catch fish on it. I've caught more fish on little pieces of hot dog and little chunks of bread that you get an entire loaf for $1. Well, pre-inflation, maybe $1. I've caught countless numbers of fish on hot dogs and bread, more than I can remember. But you can find a way to put meat on the table, no matter what style of man you are. Don't think that you can't listen to punk rock or gangster rap and go out and put meat on the table. You can. Don't think that it's just for the people that listen to country music and have side-by-sides and drive jacked up trucks. Again, there's nothing against that. If that's who you are and how you identify, then have at it and don't apologize for it. But don't think that you need to be in some certain kind of gun culture or hunting culture to hunt, because you don't. Hunting is something that should be open to every man. You should, as a man, want to be able to put meat on the table for your family, whether or not you can go to a grocery store. With that, I think that's a good place to start wrapping up this episode, man. Thanks. I appreciate you listening. If you want to support the podcast, if you thought that this podcast, if this message was worth getting out there for you, if any of the tips were worth the fraction of the cost of a box of ammo or a pair of boots, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and becoming a patron. There are some insider things on there for just patrons. I do believe that my professional list that I had when I was a professional hunter for getting people sighted in and ready for a hunt are on there. I do believe that my trapping kit when I was a professional trapper is all laid out and on there. Things like that are available to patrons. So you get those if you're a patron. You also get an insider chat if you're a patron where you can literally ask me, hey, I'm in this area. How do you think I can best do this? Or what gun or what scope or what barrel. I get those kind of questions, and I'm happy to answer them for the patrons. So if you want access to that, and mostly if you want to support this message and be an active, productive participant of it, consider becoming a patron. And again, you do that at goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, men, I want to say thanks for listening. Let me grab a handy Bible that is nearby, and we'll get into the tactical verse of the day. God provides. The Holy Spirit provides. Not at all what I was thinking, but I opened the Bible to this, and it is very fitting when I think about it. You'll find this in the Gospel of Mark. While they were eating, Jesus took the bread, gave a prayer of thanks, broke it, and gave it to his disciples. "Take it," he said. "This is my body." Then he took the cup, gave thanks to God, and handed it to them, and they all drank from it. Jesus said, "This is my blood, which is poured out for many, my blood which seals God's covenant. I tell you, I will never again drink this wine until the day I drink the new wine in the kingdom of God." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. We talked about putting meat on the table, but what's more important is the bread of life. The bread of life. Having communion, being part of and partnered with and joined to Jesus Christ, your Savior. I hope that communion is part of your daily life, part of your weekly life, not just something you do at church. I hope that you take seriously taking Jesus into you, literally, and as a manifestation of that, communion. Accepting Jesus' sacrifice as your sacrifice for sin. With that, men, I want to say thanks for listening to the Alpha Male Podcast. Have a blessed day.